Good morning. Seems like I'm going to have to start doing some sort of coffee hour this morning. Coffee hour with Swarm Intelligence, Swarm AI. I wasn't planning necessarily again on doing this morning, but and actually I have an exciting afternoon. I'm going to be going out to the Vanguard campus, which is outside of Philadelphia, off of 202 and Malvern, and I'm hoping to see the Theseus building. They have a bunch of buildings out there named for Greek mythology, and there's some other interesting things around Malvern that I'm hoping to see that kind of actually connect over to some of the stuff in Santa Barbara and nanotechnology. And then tomorrow, in advance of the big merge, the Ethereum mainnet merge to the Beacon chain that's coming up soon, I'm going to go out to Bell Labs. And I thought there was a Bell Labs, but literally there are like at least 3 different facilities that are Bell Labs, various versions. And so I'm definitely going to try to hit up the one that Scott Stornetta was at, which is Bellcore, where he developed that first distributed timestamp document software, which is sort of the precursor to all the Bitcoin stuff. And in my assessment, at least right now, I think probably even more important to what's unfolding with the metaverse. But there's the current campus, which is now Nokia. This is all in central New Jersey. And there's the Saarinen designed campus, which is now like this co-working space. And this is a very crazy 1960s campus. You should look it up online. Like there's an aerial with a water tower in the distance, like an egg. And it's like the early conversation pits. And I don't know, it's been redone. So I don't know how many of those I'm going to get to because I actually want to stop. There's a swamp. The Nokia Bell Labs and Bellcore, which are kind of close to each other. That part of New Jersey has a little bit of the Appalachian Mountains that kind of go through. They're not big mountains, but on the west side is a national wildlife area that's a swamp. And I actually really love a good swamp. And I want to pick up some things to go along with to make my hearts that I do. And then on the other side is a little ridge line, and it's a park. There's a lot of trails there, but there's a deserted village. And this deserted village was, I think, initially a company, like, I don't know, lumber for printing. They were using the wood. And then that lumber printing town turned into a resort and in the late 19th century before the Jersey Shore kind of took all of the resort traffic. So and then there's another one on the way to the Saarinen that actually is a little county park that has fossil beds. And so like, I don't know how much I'm going to have to, like, if I get up really early, I don't know how early the swamp opens, but I'm hoping to like kind of make this circuit through New Jersey tomorrow and leave my hearts and write up a little bit about it. So I wasn't necessarily expecting to do this morning, but I think I do feel that like making some real life connections between toxic social media and artificial societies and my own personal experience and the Swarm Intelligence book probably might be useful to people. And so again, this is all meant to be explanatory. So I don't know. And again, I will credit my friend Steffer. She's always like out there ahead finding stuff. And then I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And the thing that she found that was really interesting this week was this Interval Research Corporation, which was linked to Paul Allen of Microsoft and a lot of brain research. And if you understand the field theory, the frequency waves, like intervals are really important. So it's connected to music and actually also signals intelligence, which is like centered, like New Jersey is just a hotbed of all this like militarized signals intelligence. But if you understand material reality as sort of this waveforms, like undulating waveforms, this Interval Research Corporation, you should look it up on Wikipedia, all of the people affiliated, incredible, like from graphic design to music to like all of these different things that are going to be connected to make this sort of new digital consciousness metaverse thing. So but then a few weeks previously, she had raised, because she has this book too, this concept of explanatory coherence. And I think explanatory coherence is really important because, as I said, I've said before, like we're a society of people. Like we tell stories. We have to, like, the world is made up of information. And right now there's even so much more information that we have access to, that like sifting it and curating it and deciding what stories we're going to tell with the information is that in a way that helps us live our lives is really important. And clearly social media is a giant presence in that space and has been for a decade, and intentionally so, because it's military signals intelligence. It's all about tracking you as agents in the game, and getting the twin societies and twin people, and like nobody knew that, like, right, it's supposed to be like a, a Harvard lookbook. No, that wasn't it, right? It was always about setting up these artificial societies and managing information. So the information management is key, and the stories that you tell are key. And what happens is that people, we have this information and then we're trying to make sense of it. And I think we've all had things happen to us, especially online, where it starts to not make sense, like, or something is inconsistent and we're trying to parse out why it's inconsistent. Is it inconsistent, especially if it's in a dynamic relationship, because the person on the other end, there's some motivation that we don't know, that is an unknown, or that the character structure of that person is different than we expected. Like, there's the unexpected things. And then we tell ourselves stories. And sometimes there's multiple stories. Like, maybe in scenario A, this person has this going on. And maybe in scenario B, this person has this going on. And like, you're never meant to know. And I think they like to keep us guessing. And actually, I will say, so reading this, I'm about halfway through at this point. This is kind of interesting. So Raoul actually had recommended this novel, and I had ordered it. And it's interesting because I feel like I do need to get back to my Texas research around Pegasus Park. And I had this ambition of doing a whole series around Greek mythology. But essentially, this book that dates to the 60s and was redone in the 70s is about like a young man sort of finding his way, imagines himself a poet, and he has this, affair with sort of an average woman, and then he wants to have something more exciting, so he goes off to Greece and he becomes a teacher on this remote island, and he falls into the sphere of influence of this sort of billionaire, secretive, mysterious man who like invites him up to his estate on the weekends, and then they play out these performances, and there's various other people involved, and then at the point where I'm at halfway through, they start to not be able to ascertain in the context of this removed environment what's real and what's not real, because the people who are involved are all playing characters, and playing characters, I guess, what do they say, mask, but not like a mask that you wear, like an MASQUE, like these plays, they're acting out, and so you're never sure if you actually know which person is inhabiting, like which character is inhabiting the person, or what their motivations are, what's really going on. And it's in this sort of exotic environment. And so this is sort of played off against his earlier life with this sort of very boring woman who ends up like being an airline stewardess or something. Like, it's this counterpoise, right? And it's all about the story and inhabiting the story and understanding, like, I guess later in this, it gets more and more complicated, right? And so, like, yeah, that's what I feel like we're navigating, right, in social media. Like, what is the story we're in? Who are these people we're in here with? What are their motivations? Do we truly understand them? Like, on the internet, nobody knows that you're a dog. And, I clearly have a pretty big footprint out on the internet, even though I've like pulled back on my social media presence. Like, I'm pretty out there for like who I am and what I do and my journey, right? I don't even know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish, other than to sort of, for me, to make my own stories and make sense of this for myself. So the explanatory coherence is the consistency in the story. And when you start to have too many inconsistencies, like, it causes psychological anxiety because you don't know, like, there's too many parts that don't fit together. And I just saw, we went to, in the theater, which was actually nice. I haven't been to a theater in a while. The movie Everywhere All at Once, Everywhere All the Time All at Once. And it literally is about a multiverse. All of these splits, people who make decisions, and then their life splits into all of these various characters, which is kind of like what social media wants to do to you. It wants you to create a split personality. Like, that's, you know what? I'm going to pause for a second because I forgot to I got started and then I didn't put on my thing for the podcast. But so Everywhere All at Once, like, it was quite interesting because it was about a multiverse, and that's where they're sort of going with all of this, is the multiverse. So I think it's relevant, the stories. And then how do you, like, part of the tension in that was that the daughter, she went into too many multiverses and her brain split. And that was the problem. Her brain couldn't handle being in all of these multiverses. And I kind of feel like that's where we're at with social media, is that there is this. Let me see if I can. This is on. Sorry, I should be more professional. I'm getting better at this. Jason gave this to me 2 years ago, and I'm getting. See, this is this little thingy. Sorry, I'm just trying to get it going. So anyway, her brain split because she was in too many multiverses, too many, and she couldn't handle it. And I feel like that's where we're at now, is that we don't have coherence. Like, we've lost our ability to cohere all of the stories because there's too many. And like, essentially in this uh the movie, this is the movie I'm talking about now, like the young woman creates a giant everything black bagel and she's gonna like try to pull her mother into the vortex of the black everything bagel to try to like bring quiet to her mind because there's too much going on. And so I feel like that film conceptually sort of meshes up with this book, The Magus. And it's interesting because this was made into a movie in the 70s, and evidently it really did not translate well because it's sort of cerebral and hard to translate to film. But a company in London bought the rights to do it as a mini series in the January of 2020. Now, I don't know where it stands. But at the same time, the company that bought the rights to do this, they were also doing a production about essentially the terrible things of the financial markets and catastrophe bonds. And I find this out the same day that Leo and Jason and I do the catastrophe bond thing. So there's all of these weird syncs going along. But so I wanted to talk a little bit about explanatory coherence from this book. And I'm going to read about 4 pages. But I think about it in terms of story. Right. In DARPA, like, actually, it's interesting because they have this whole program. It was called Narrative Networks. That was, I don't know, 10 years ago. So they were already very clearly involved in story. And then I know that there's some questions about like some of these online platforms and how the story is being spun. And later on, there's going to be sort of a critique of me and like editing comments or what have you. But yeah, I do. I curate comments. Like, I'm here for the good energy, and like, most of the comments that are directed at me that are negative are not substantive. They're just like, I don't like you, or blah, blah, blah. Or like, maybe there's some people who are like, I like blockchain. How dare you not like blockchain? But really, like, there's nothing really meaningful people have other than to say, I don't like you, or I don't believe you, or whatever. You have fuzzy hair, or you're a delusional person, you have delusions of grandeur or something. Like, it's not really helpful. So yeah, I curate comments. I think it's really ironic that people who are in a space like this is clearly a militarized space, imagine that somehow it's neutral. Like that the military can control the algorithms and the comments or whatever, but like the people who are providing content also can't like weigh in on that. Like, so anyway, if that bothers you, feel free to unfollow me. That's just the truth of it. I don't like, yeah, I curate stuff. I figure you're here for what I have to say, not for the comment section. And the comment section really isn't anything I really care about. I mean, no offense. I appreciate like people doing affirmative comments, and it's nice to know that people are out there listening, but I'm not looking to create a community in the comment space. It is managed. So, okay, explanatory coherence. So this is explanatory coherence. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the rise of the connectionist paradigm in cognitive psychology, which is based almost entirely on simulation results, caught the attention of some social psychologists, but the field was faced with a dilemma. While it became obvious that the connectionist models were very consistent with traditional social psychological theorizing, social psychological methodologists were still reluctant to accept computer simulations as a legitimate research strategy. It's one thing to cite Axelrod's research and quite another to program simulations of your own model. So that's like the Purdue sentient world simulation, right? And the thing I will say that's really interesting about applied sociology, like that's Pitirim Sorapkin, the Harvard guy who wanted to, tap into love and control everybody as a good person. The applied sociologists, the Odom brothers, who were the leaders in the the rise of the ecosystem movement and the environmental movement, not so much activism, but the science side of like ecology studies in the 50s under the Atomic Energy Commission. Their father was a really prominent sociologist at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And so their approach to ecosystems was really informed by their father's research in sort of progressive social systems management. So like just put that in the back of your head in terms of biophysics and managing us as digital avatars on a game board, that the biophysics guys who are like foundational to all of the track and trace technologies that we're going to have, like from, the aerospace, satellite drone management, is founded in this sort of social progressive ideology of the father. So when you're looking at social systems modeling and simulation, that matters. The reluctance diminished under the two-pronged attack of a paper and a computer program developed by a Canadian philosopher named Paul, I don't know, it's Thagard or Thagard, Thagard. Thagard's 1989 paper in Behavior and Brain Sciences described a cognition in terms of a search for a coherent explanation for events. Okay, I'm going to say cognition as a search for coherent explanation for events. And again, that's what I would just say. Like in this book, like that part of the psychological breakdown of the person is that they can't actually get a handle on what, there's not a coherency. They can't get a handle on what's actually happening. And I would say that's the same with these lockdowns, right? Everyone's trying to say, like, why did this happen? Like, why, what were the motivations? And essentially to get down to the core, in my opinion, of what's happening based on what I see, it causes incredible cognitive dissonance because you have to actually let go of a huge amount of stuff you thought you knew about the world. Okay. Okay, so a coherent explanation for events, and postulated a number of aspects of coherence that needed to be accounted for. The concept of coherence does not seem to differ dramatically from Smolensky's principle of harmony. Again, harmony is those frequency waves. Thagard prefers to spell it harmony, Harmany, in tribute to the Princeton philosopher Gilbert Harman. But the focus on explanation set Thagard's theory apart from connectionist thought and placed it comfortably within the domain of social psychology. Like some previous philosophers and psychologists, Thagard theorized that people understand events by placing them in the context of a narrative or explanation, a story. This much was familiar to social psychologists, and in fact, investigators had long been looking for a good comprehensive theory of explanation. But Thagard brought in something that social psychologists were not used to. He supported his theory of explanation by encoding it in a connectionist computer program, okay? So again, this goes back to like Jacob Moreno's sociograms and the nodes and the connections. So they're applying a social system and putting it and virtualizing it, right? And we know that Purdue is right in the middle of all of that. Some neural net software had been distributed with the parallel distributing processing volumes, but it was mostly used to demonstrate examples from the book and was not well designed for research. Thagard's ECHO program, ECHO, ECHO stands for Explanatory Coherence Harmony Optimization, though available in the Lisp and C programming languages, let researchers tweak parameters, design their own models, try things. And in a footnote to the BBS paper, Thagard made the program available on request. And as social psychologists experimented with it, they found that parallel constraint networks were almost exactly what they had been theorizing about for years, under names like cognitive dissonance theory, consistency theory, balance theory, congruence theory, and many others. Those theoretical descriptions of human thought address various aspects of the need for individuals to maintain consistency among their beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. So I'm going to say this again, okay? Those theoretical descriptions of human thought addressed various aspects of the need for individuals to maintain consistency among their beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. Just what maximizing a harmony function does. Harmony or coherence is maximized when the nodes of a network fit together, when positively connected elements are in the same state and negatively connected ones are in opposite states, when dissonance is minimized. So I will say, again, harmony is really important, and frequency. And harmony is actually one of these early UBI examples. I know that I was seeing a video from East Denver that had the guy that was connected to harmony, and he was also affiliated in Japan on sort of cognitive neuroscience. So I think again, we need to I mean, I'm a materialist. Like my background is in landscape and art and paintings. Um, but the physics of material reality and waveforms, these people are messing around in that space that is beyond what most of us can comprehend. They know what they're doing and they're managing society from that beyond space. And increasingly the web3, which includes the digital, programmable money, but this web3 system, which might even eventually get to sort of your nano neural economies where they put nanobots that are having economics of thoughts in your mind that you're allowed to think or not think, maybe programmed based on your harmony and consistency. Like, don't think that thought, that's going to mess you up. Don't go there. We're doing this all for your mental health, right? Like, imagine like they have, I was just mentioning to somebody yesterday about like Peter Thiel's investments in psychedelics, right? Imagine if they start to create psychedelic economies that are linked to like nano delivery, and they can do an economy that like essentially builds your reality in your brain. I don't know. It's really crazy to think about. I would not want that. I would not want that. Okay. Yeah, but they would just say it's to minimize dissonance, right? Stephen Reed at the University of Southern California, which is where they're developing synthetic people, and Elliott Smith at Purdue independently began to introduce some computer simulated connectionist models into the social psychological literature. An important finding of these early papers was that echo programs could replicate the results of many traditional laboratory experiments. Other researchers have begun to participate in this new paradigm using simulations to investigate theoretical ideas. As of today, very, very few social psychologists, now this is 2001, so this is 20 years ago, have adopted this simulation method of research, but they are tolerating them, and simulations are accepted in most social psychological journals. So I would say the difference that happened over 20 years is really, really significant. Like the sentient world simulation is really, really significant. And the military's involvement, because I think it's like Project Minerva, like the Defense Department and DARPA are deeply, deeply involved in behavioral psychology. Like that should come as no surprise to people, right? Like we know all of the operations, the MK Ultras, artichokes, all of that, right? Like, so this is not surprising that they would apply this to our digital societies. But I think, again, people wander around in there and they want to maybe wag their finger at me for curating comments or whatever, and they don't realize they're literally in a military video game. Like, seriously, guys, like interrogate yourself. If you're really that upset about being managed, you just shouldn't be there in the first place, which is why I got off of Twitter and Facebook. Like, it is a military zone, and pretending to be, a gamified town commons or something like that. Like, but it's a military psyop. And so, like, if I'm your biggest problem in the military psyop, like maybe you actually need to look up a little bit on the history of what the hell this shit is. Okay, so I'm going to do, this is two more pages, networks in groups. Okay, so this is kind of like linking, it's talking about like these dots and how like each of us would be these dots. These are these earliest sociograms. One innovation relevant to our present discussion was reported by a cognitive anthropologist, Edwin Hutchins. Hutchins, 1995, may be credited with breaking the connectionist paradigm out of its inside-the-head cognitivistic shell and opening up the possibilities of studying cognition in a social context. So again, I think this is related to the world brain, right? The world sensorium, getting people pulled out of their own minds. Like, not that the mind is necessarily right in there, right? Like, it's like there, but to harvest the noosphere, that's where things are going. Like, they're looking to get into the noosphere and understand that connections in there. A parallel constraint satisfaction network, as described in chapter 2, depicts a number of cognitive elements and the relations between pairs of them. Some elements are consistent with others and inconsistent with yet others, and the goal is to find a pattern of activity and inactivity of elements that is most consistent, cohesive, and harmonious. Some elements may be considered external, that is, they represent known facts or perceived phenomena in the environment. Of course, the internal parts of the network should be consistent with these as well as with one another. Hutchins wants to see what would happen if a group of people, in his example, if it were the crew of a ship, were able to communicate with one another. Each person was represented as a parallel constraint satisfaction network. And Hutchins programmed a model with 4 of them, where an occasional node of one was positively connected to the corresponding node of another. This was like one person communicating their belief to another person, affecting the strength with which the other person held that belief, encouraging agreement. So that's the peer pressure stuff. And um, I would say so the peer pressure and the zone of influence is really important. And one of the things I was trying to talk about, and hopefully, I think at least Jason and I are going to do another presentation on these Voronoi patterns, but is this idea like I sort of imagine that they talk about human digital twins, right? There's the NTT white paper, and they're talking about the twin, and you sort of imagine like, oh, maybe it's like a little Barbie doll version of you, like the little avatar version of you. But I think realistically, knowing that it's all math, that if you imagine that it's energy, right? Like it's coordinates, it's data, and it's moving over time, and that you've got these Voronoi diagrams in 3D that are polyhedra. They have them in a cube, and then they have all these multifacets like a crystal. And so if you imagine like your essence being represented numerically, like turned into some sort of binary, like, vortex and stuck in a box in some sort of representation, it's not going to be the depth of you, right? It's going to be just some of you. And you'll be in this box, right? Like the blockchain box, they're always like all the blockchain stuff is box. They're putting us in the digital Skinner box, and you've got this energy, and then you start to put zones of influence. Like if you imagine like when the magician like puts the drops the sword through the box of the lady, but you've got all of these things going through the plane, and it's confining the energy, like the data system, into this complex crystal. And then those planes of influence will change over time. So if they need you to conform like this giant Tetris game, like, there's some maybe quantum AI, right? HAL 9000 out there, and these crystals are pivoting into some larger plan of a reality that is like intended. And like, oh, we need to pivot you. No, we need to fit you in this way or that way. And they'll poke you. And then they can do that through your spheres of influence. They can get at you through both factors like environmental, social, economic. They can deform your crystal and remake it because it's dynamic over time, right? And they can make the crystal be what it needs to be through frequency and harmony to get it into the spot for where it needs to work with all the other crystals. And that's kind of like the initial thing that they're talking about with these connected dots with the guy on the ship. That's a very simple form of it, right? Because it's just a dot. It's not a dynamic polyhedra crystal in a box. But I think that that's what they're after. And I think that's what the military knows how to do. And I think that's what Fritz Kunst was talking about when he was talking about tensors and vectors and trying to find Eros, the sea of creativity in the universe. And I think they knew this back in the 40s, and they've been working on it. And probably a lot of the mind control experimentation was about getting consciousness and getting these data points. And I think really, honestly, the biophysics of all of the Cold War, I keep saying, if you can put the lens on, and I know it's uncomfortable, you'll be like, well, I don't know about that, right? But if you can put the lens on that, the Cold War wasn't about, like, they never actually planned to destroy the planet. Like the mutually assured destruction was their story that they wanted us to inhabit, while the people who were developing the next phase were using the planned atoms for peace for this human plus experimentation in biophysics that would make us machine readable and trackable within geospatial data analytics from space. And that essentially the missiles, the threat of the destruction, enabled them to weaponize space and create all of the infrastructure, the satellite systems, the keyholes, to refine everything, to also, go into space and look back and say, oh, look, it's a marble, it's a spaceship, it's a closed system. Like we have to manage it in a certain way. It set all of that up, right? But the people from the Pugwash conferences were working, like Russia and the US, like they were all at Pugwash all the time, right? They knew they weren't going to blow each other up. They just wanted to make sure that they could eventually get us in this damn game of the frequency and the intervals. And put us in their boxes with their sociograms. And I would say another person that's really big on this is Sandy Pentland, who was with the MIT Media Lab. And he was doing really early tracking of social relationships. And I have some of this written up in a piece on Foundation for Integrated Education that I haven't put out yet. But he was tagging people with like devices and then following them. And in fact, there was like a little town in Italy that he tracked couples and all of their social dynamics. So the social physics is a real thing, and they've been working on it for a long time. And so this book, again, is old. It's 20 years old. Okay. So Hutchins, okay, so let's see. They're talking to each other. Okay. Okay, so they're being influenced by each other, right? Hutchins found when individuals were highly connected, what he describes as a mega mind, the entire population gravitated towards some unsatisfactory solution, some combination of elements that could be highly inconsistent. And when they operated in isolation, the usual results were obtained, and each one tended to converge on one good pattern or the other. But when individuals were moderately connected, the entire population ended up in agreement, stabilized in one optimal pattern or the other. So that's interesting, right? I mean, that's interesting. That's interesting. So what they're saying is if you have a lot of connectivity, there is dissonance. And if you're working in isolation, there are good solutions, but they're individualized. But their goal is like a moderately connected society. So I think we can imagine the past 2 years have been a lot about that, right? Like for them managing the social systems and the social networks to try to tune in this moderate society. Hutchins was more interested in observing the effects of different patterns of connections and did not remark on the fact that multiple networks could help one another optimize their activations. What we are working towards in this discussion is a model where the optimizing occurs through connections between individuals. Thus, Hutchins' results are especially interesting to us. Okay, so they're working. So again, who is optimizing whom? And that is the cybernetics, right? That cybernetics is you're on a route, you're being sort of pushed off by the wind and the waves, and the governance mechanisms brings you back. But who's deciding what harbor you're going to? Because mostly in the cybernetic system, you're not getting to the harbor. Hutchins did not explain how he created his groups of networks, but we can guess that rather than running 4 echo programs simultaneously and adding connections, he designed one network and deleted most of the connections between subsets. These subsets were then conceptualized as individuals, though in actuality, the group was the individual, and the so-called individuals were simply partly disconnected cells of the superorganism. There we go. We've got Oliver Reiser and the superorganism. This is remindful of the American philosopher Charles Peirce's comments on the human state of ignorance. A longish, perfectly typical Peircean quote is appropriate. And this is the quote. What anything really is what it may finally come to be known in the ideal state of complete information, so that reality depends on the ultimate decision of the community. The individual man, since his separate existence is manifested only by ignorance and error, so far as he is anything apart from his fellows, and from what he and they are is only a negation. Okay, that's kind of confusing. All right. So Peirce is suggesting that because reality is defined by ultimate social consensus, and because we never know everything that everyone else thinks, true, we are always in a negative state of knowledge or ignorance. There is a hypothetical transpersonal network out there where all the nodes are connected, but we as individuals exist in a state of unconnectedness. We are able to transmit partial information to one another and use this incomplete information to move ourselves, our community into a better position to understand and deal with the world. And I would say like that's part of the challenge, is that we don't have the information. And I would say, but we're exposed to so much information. Like that's what social media does to you. It's like so much information, right? But it's curated information, and it puts people in your zone that it wants to be put in your zone. And I even had something after I got off Facebook, 2 people I knew independently on Facebook but didn't know each other ended up in some sort of like online altercation that was literally like triggered by algorithms. That these are 2 lovely people who in person would never have had such an argument, but it was like the algorithm was triggering. So they're talking about optimizing for society, but I think actually a lot of this is triggering because they want the conflict data to push the social polarity into the world brain and to get more data for the AI. Okay, Hutchinson's analysis suggests that moderate ignorance permits not only cognitive consistency, but agreement among members of a group. Okay, so that like may explain a lot of things, right? Is like moderate ignorance permits consistency. So it's better to live in a state of moderate ignorance. And I guess that's the problem with, once you choose to go beyond the acceptance of a certain level of moderate ignorance and you start following the money or pulling the thread, then your presence in the space starts to disturb everyone else's understanding of consensus reality. And that's really hard. Like we've seen that for 2.5 years. Like literally at some point, there was a split between people who were living in one understanding of facts and people who were living in another understanding of facts. And for me, because of my life journey and the work I had been doing in schools before all this happened, like I totally was always in the different set of facts because I couldn't unknow what I already knew. But my understanding just made it really, really difficult for other people. So again, just to reiterate, the concept is explanatory coherence. And we need to know that these people have been doing social simulation modeling on computers for at least 25 years, like well underway, right? Deep in its military mind control stuff, level stuff. And so if we are wading into these things, and again, I was trying to, like on Twitter, like not follow other people, not be part of the algorithms. And I still felt pulled in because it would trigger me with like, here's an email for something somebody said. And then you look and you're like, oh, because honestly, most of the stuff that's out there is just noise. It's just total noise. It's not making us better people. It's confusing and muddying the waters and helping them build their simulation networks. So this is context for, and I probably, again, maybe this was not the best choice of doing it. But I actually was in Twitter yesterday, and you can actually poke around without an account to a certain extent. And I came across that troll account that was like blocked by McD or something, and they were like, I don't know, dancing on my Twitter grave that I when I quit or whatever. And it's this, I printed it out. I can put a link in the comments so you can see it. Yeah, this is blocked. Allison McDowell left Twitter. Here's her post about it. I hope Philly 852 reflects on how her intolerance contributed to the toxicity of her social media life, as this can only be an improvement which will benefit her as well as those who appreciate her work. Now, I would say in terms of toxicity, blocking people, and I'm not saying blocking people was like necessarily the best, but for me, like it was an energetic thing. Like I didn't really want to engage. Like I had 20,000 people supposedly, like we know those aren't real people, like following me. I didn't really want to, I do an incredible amount of work and I don't really want to be dragged into all this crap. So if you're not into my stuff, you can move along. You can find my stuff on my blog. I don't need to engage with you. I didn't follow anyone. And as far as I can tell, and this is what's so ironic in the resistance is they're all about policing how other people do it. There's one way to be the resistance. And I'm like, no, this tool is built this way. I'm using it this way. I don't follow back. I block people and I don't follow anybody. And I curate my stuff. And I put out a shit ton of material. I had 20,000 tweets with most of it primary research material asking people to do their own damn homework. So if you find that toxic, then what was it that led this person to feel that they needed to make this account? And literally, because I had blocked them early on. And I find it interesting. I don't know how many other people who follow me on Twitter noticed this account or if they ever actually stood up for me on this account. But this is pretty toxic behavior to essentially identify yourself as some other person, in opposition. That's a polarizing force. And that is clearly part of one of these mind game programs. So yeah, that's all, folks. Again, dancing on my Twitter grave, even though they essentially their entire identity was against me, right? And then so this person, this at the bottom that you can kind of see, opinionist. Now you can see black glasses, bandana, backwards hat, right? That's how they represent online. Now this is a person who had come into my messages actually, and very, wanting information, wanting long, heartfelt pouring out stuff in my messages. And I would try to give them some information and they were in Italy. They said that's the story. Again, it's sort of the mages, well, who's who on the internet? Are you the black goat on the internet? They said they were in Milan and I was trying to fill them in on the stuff that I knew about the Vatican and impact finance. And they said, oh, thank you. This is the missing piece. And I'm just so glad to have this missing piece. And I'm just telling my people, and I've been doing this forever, but you have the missing piece. And I was like, okay, that's cool. Here's some stuff. And the Italian telecom guy was running the EU, stuff here's some stuff for you. And so whatever. So this person who totally did this. So this is her response to the guy dancing on my Twitter grave. It says, I actually blocked her and she hadn't blocked me. Had I known that she was leaving, I would have called her out myself. I did a I did on Thread Irish's blog after she followed my tweet to the blog, and I have a lot to say for months, and I kept it to myself. Big mistake on my part. So, and again, it's ironic because people are literally on Twitter, which is a public platform. Like, it's not like Facebook or some group where you're stalking people's screenshots. People are actively publicly putting themselves out. So yeah, like sometimes I would look and see who was following me or what they were up to, and I would go to a blog and I would comment, because in this particular case, this Thread Irish person was like missing the whole point. And this person was uplifting it as like, this is something great to share with your friends. And yet this was a very controlled story that was on this blog, whether the person understood that it was controlled or not. It was a very limited story. And this person who had come into my messages and asked for all sorts of information and uplifted me as someone who knew all of the things. Like I didn't, this was their framing, was literally sharing the wrong stuff, like and not questioning. And so I weighed in, and yeah, I had my comments, and I can be direct, but they think that this is terrible that I would follow their tweet to a blog. Like, do they not know how Twitter works? Do they not know? Like, that's how Twitter works. It's like there's networked information. That's how you find things. So anyway, like it's just so bizarre. So, so then, and maybe this was triggering for me. So this tweet was on July 19th. So that's right when I was leaving. So then you can maybe see, this is August 22nd. So not that long ago. Here she is again. This is her thing. It's a reply. It's not surprising. According to a video of Alison McDowell's I watched today, Twitter is run by MIT Media Labs for the purpose of teaching the AI how to reason and manipulate us. And I will send you the vid because it can't be posted here directly from my phone. And the guy's like, oh, thanks. And she's like, you're more than welcome. I thought about it because your original tweet was how these losers always censor the most important information. I appreciate you sending it to me to begin with, right? So here on July 19th, she's like, oh my God, that woman actually followed me to another blog and commented, and I can't believe it. And I have terrible things to say about her. That's July 19th. And then we've got August 22nd. Oh my gosh, I just got all this amazing information from her blog post about, like, I found it helpful and I'm sharing it with you. And I'm like, there is no explanatory coherence between these two things. Do we see? There's no planetary, this is a military mind game. Now, I don't even know if this is actually a person. Like, again, this person, at least cultivates themselves as some kind of hidden person behind the scenes truther. So this is what I emailed, because, I'm human, right? And maybe I shouldn't have, but it got to me. The explanatory incoherence got to me. I said, see attached. I included both screenshots. I said, because this person had commented on my blog. And so, had their email. And I said, this is what Twitter does to people. So if you want to trash someone online, at least have the decency to stop referring to their research, right? Like, if you want to say, like, oh my gosh, I hate this person, and let me tell you all the ways I do, and then turn around a month later and use their stuff, like, that's not actually cool. Like, if you actually do believe that they're wrong, then stop using my information. Like, if you're out there and you're trashing me and yet you still want to use the research and the resources I put out, like, come on, think about it. Like, that's incoherent. I said, maybe you'll catch up someday, but do me a favor and stop using my sweat and tears together, right? Like, so this is where I was. This is a person who cultivated me in my messages. And so I said, so this is what I got this morning. And I'm going to read this out because clearly this woman, she goes by Opinionist Jen in, I guess, supposedly Milan, Italy, who's all connected with all sorts of people, was very upset that I would curate comments. And again, so I would say, again, think about this. So we don't know. Like, think about these two books. We don't know what reality is, and they're fucking with reality. They're literally in a digital mind game. And who's to say that this is even a person? Like, I don't know. Like, it's unclear. But this person's background was in, as they represented themselves, was in the truther community for years and years. Like, that's what they told me. Oh my gosh, I'm in the truther community. I know all these things, but I didn't know this, right? And I've had that happen a couple times because, yeah, I wasn't in the truther community. Like, yeah, it wasn't my time. Like, that wasn't my time. My awakening was in the public schools. And actually, if I had come up in the truther community, like, I think that there's some sense that maybe they don't think it was managed. Like, that's a hugely managed community. It has been. It probably was a bed of examination, just like I was talking about yesterday with Jeffrey Strahl and asking him to examine the subsets of the resistance, including terrain, as either a willing or unwilling experimental place to look at social behavior, right? Because clearly that has been happening. Clearly that has been the plan all along. So this is the reply to me, and so I'm just asking as an educational, and just for the record, to think about what I was just talking about story and coherence. And if you do presume that this is actually a legitimate person, that isn't a construction, because that's essentially what she's calling me, I think, is a construction, that there's a story that this person needed to tell in her mind about who I was, so that she could maintain the coherence of her identity. Like, she needed me to be a certain kind of person to tell a story about me, whether or not, like, there really aren't any facts backing any of this up. It's just stuff that's coming out of her mouth and other people's mouths, for her to maintain her consensus reality in her environment. And I think we just need to understand that this is what's going on for all people. Like, this is just a sample person. I don't know. There could be hundreds of people out there who would love to write me a terrible email and call me, something, because they need that for their identity. And because I actually have spent some time to know about the tools, and I'm actually really confident in what I have to offer. And I will say, in this tone, some of what's happening, I believe, is that they need for me to not be a regular person. They need for me to be part of a network or something, because actually the thing that could change everything is that we individually are empowered to be the change. So they need to put me as part of some bigger network, because one individual couldn't possibly do the things that I do. Like, that's their storyline. One person couldn't possibly do the things. So then that puts everyone else off the hook. Like, it disempowers everyone when someone who is an individual, like, and you can look around my living room. I mean, this is me. Like, this is not like, this is my house. Like, I'm pretty obvious about where I am. Like, when I pulled off of social media, I went back to YouTube. I know I know Google Alphabet as the mind file. Yeah. Like, I'm not saying it's perfect, but you can actually go back to my first YouTube videos of me at city council. And if you want to imagine that, we made those up, and who would? Because I'm not actually asking for anybody's followers. I'm not telling anybody what to do. Essentially, what I'm just doing is I'm asking people to step into their own story and control their own story and control their own understanding and be confident and use your gifts and celebrate other people. So if I'm connected to anything, I'm connected to the damn universe. Like, the universe put me here to do this work. And I am fortunate to have the material resources, which are not extravagant. I'm clearly not an extravagant person to do this work, because I'm supposed to. It's a righteous work. So here is Jen, the opinionist from Milan. And then you can give her a heads up about this. I told her I was going to read it on my live stream. It's Jen at JenMax57. On Twitter. Yeah. So just to let her know. So no, this isn't what Twitter does to people. Okay. But it actually did it to her. It created this incoherence. But certainly it's what Twitter brought out in you. And I will agree. And that's why I got off. I have been happy to have told you what I think of you to your face long ago, but I've already seen how you smear people on the internet, and I have enough real life issues to deal with without your cult members or handlers coming after me for having offended you. You see, I really am just a mom. So there's the cult language again, right? And there's the followers. Like, I don't have a cult. I don't have followers. Like, if there are people who stand up for me, I would say smearing people online, the things that I've done, I've called out Derek Brose for his position on digital child labor and child sovereignty, and all the people surrounding him, including Catherine Austin Fitts, who backed him up on that. I've called out Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on his positionality in the space regarding sustainability and emerging tech investment and bottled water and taking money from the Rockefeller Foundation. Yeah, those are all things I've called out. I've called out people like Greg Carlwood and others who are accepting blockchain and not really saying that they want the truth, but they're not going to be able to do the truth because they're actually connected into the blockchain space through payments or digital media or what have you. I've called out that. I've called out people who have lied about me or misrepresented me, including Whitney Webb and Jeffrey Strahl, and I made the record clear. So if that's what you want to say about smearing people, I would say, like, I'm able to actually stand up for what my beliefs are because I'm disconnected. I'm not connected to anybody. Yeah, Doug, yeah. I mean, they're all like, there's a ton of people who have come. Imagine, like, literally. So if you want to call that a smear, which is essentially standing on my values and standing up, being very clear for people in a very confusing time, like, you can call that a smear, and you can call being held accountable, like, by the people who agree with the view I have. If you find that problematic, why are you on social media? Like, that's my question. As for quote unquote citing your work, I'd certainly be free to do so if I were interested, but I'm not. Again, evidence. This is August, a month after the nasty comments. She says she's not interested in my work, and yet she's actually reading it and sharing it. Okay. She's not interested, even though she clearly is, but they don't realize that Twitter actually is a record, right? Twitter is actually out there and seeable. Especially after you actually chased me to a site and had the unmitigated gall to lecture me because I posted something that was clearly marked, share this with your sleeping friends. Okay, yeah. So I went to a blog that she linked to and said that you're missing the point. This is the bigger story. Your own word salad isn't able to be shared with or understood by people who are just beginning to open their eyes, but that's as it's meant to be. Okay. So, all right, if you find it word salad, then you interpret it. Like, actually, we're all empowered in this because I've made it very, very clear that I can only take things so far. So if what you're saying is you need to essentially share material from somebody else that is an incomplete story, then you're actually not doing anybody a service if what you're sharing is a controlled story. You're actually, then maybe what you need to do is work on yourself and figure out how to interpret it in words that make sense to you. And this clearly is a woman who imagines herself very smart, very much truthy, truth, that she should be able to do that rather than to pick a story that is limited, right? If she finds my material too complex, she could reinterpret it. And that's what I've asked people to do because none of my stuff is paywalled. I'm not making any money off of any of this stuff. I'm here as a public service, and this has been done. Literally, like, Eve did an amazing zine, and I'm incredibly grateful for that interpretation because it's not a competition. We're not competing in this. We're trying to tell the story that will change reality. Okay. You've said, let's see. You've said maybe I'll catch up someday, and then something about your sweat and tears. Honey, as we say in the South, dripping with sarcasm regarding the sweat and tears, don't all of your advertisements say you're just a mom? What's with the sweat and tears as if what you're doing isn't a job? It's not a job. It's not a job. I don't see none of these people who want to pretend that I'm a cult leader or that I'm being paid off by someone. They never actually say what they think or what my goal would be. What is my goal? Like, I am the person the FBI has set up to bring down the blockchain eco-villages, or I'm the person who's asking people to put dandelion hearts out because I'm just trying to distract y'all from the central bank digital currency rollout, or I don't know what they think. I'm not really here for other people. I'm here for me. And I'm here to make sense, to offer a story as I see it from being situated in a place of myth, of Philadelphia, the myth. And it's not for everybody. That's fine. I'm not here for everybody. But to imply that this is a job, I would just ask, what motivation is in this space, in the coherence game, to make it sound like I wouldn't just do this or make this commitment because I'm human and I care? What is it about that part of me that is so scary to the structure and again, I've always said, we have a comfortable home. Like, I'm not an extravagant person. I have the stability to do this work. And then therefore I have a responsibility to do this work. So if you want to call my husband my underwriter because he works at Penn, yeah, okay. Like, what does that mean? Like, everybody who has access to resources should just sit in the corner and wait for the end to come and let the paid journalists do it? Let the paid alt media superstars do it? What is that about? Where does that come from in people's soul that they need to put me in their story as someone who has a job, as someone who's going to take my snake to Bell Labs because it's my job? Because what? This is my job assignment for the week. This is task rabbit activism. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Just a mom who has highs all over the internet 24/7. This is now the second time you've publicly followed what I've written. So God knows how many times you've really done it. Why are people on the public internet if they don't want to have their material looked at? Why? Why would you make that choice? Yeah, you're allowed to look. That's the whole point of social media. Just a mom who produces more product, videos, articles, blog posts, interviews, trips around the country, research in quotes, et cetera, than one person could produce in a 5-year period. How on earth did you find the time to follow me and others checking for posts about yourself? Yeah, I put in a lot of dumb work. A lot. Unpaid. And it's fine because I'm not supposed to be paid. This is not what I'm here to like. What I'm here to do is this work because I can. Yeah, and I did it. Are you like, do people really imagine what I have a team of people behind me? I mean, that's silly. Just a mom who told her followers to interact with people who are known to be working for the perps, such as James Corbett, Catherine Austin Fitts, and Lord knows who else, when you were having your tiff with Derek Bros. You actually told people to ask those known agents of the dark side why they were doing and saying what they were, instead of telling them to stay as far away as possible from those people. Yeah, so when the thing was happening with Derek, it was related to his event. And I asked for all the speakers to be held accountable and to ask people to hold, like, if you value those people's insight, you should hold them accountable for participating in an event where the person is actively talking about child sovereignty and child labor, right? Like, now that's not me because I'm not really a follower of other people, but there are a lot of people out there who do follow those people on the platforms. And so I was asking for people who valued those people's insights to ask them why they were participating and where they stood on that issue. And that's a legit ask. You are also guilty of editing YouTube comments and then posting them on Twitter as a whole. And what can one say as someone who actually has the balls to admit they curate the comment section of their channel? Curate means censor the comments from hundreds of people who see right through your operation. Yeah, I curate. You don't think YouTube curates? You don't think Twitter curates? Like, you think you're living in a neutral space? Really, Jen? You think Twitter's neutral? I mean, here you just said, you're more than welcome. I thought it was because your original tweet was about how these losers always censor the most important information. I mean, that's the platform. That's the platform. Let's see. I could go on for another 2 hours about exactly why you're a suspect character. The funny thing is that you're telling me about catching up. Where were you 10 years ago? Probably participating in politics, believing in the official story of September 11th, and believing that kids were killed at Sandy Hook. In fact, you probably still believe all of that crap, but you show up out of the blue at a tumultuous time in history, and you just so happen to have all of the inside information and all of the answers. Well, everybody has their own journey. Everybody has their own time. My time was 2013 and public education. And you can go back. Anybody can go back. Google me. You'll see. Like, there's nothing constructed. The universe turned on my switch in 2013. And who knows how many people are still going to have their switches turned on at some point. And some of it's going to be based, I think, on the work that we're doing, the small group of us who are trying to talk about this outside of an ideological framework. You know, and I didn't come out of the truther community because the reality is if I did, I probably wouldn't have been able to see it because those people were managed. They were managed to not see it. They were managed to create their own social groups and their own infighting and their own countercultures. And like I even had when I was on Greg Callwood, he's like, I'm really kind of surprised because, you know, even all the people who used to know all this stuff, like they don't know any of these things that you're talking about. And I said, yeah, well, this is this is where I show up. I show up when they close 23 schools in Philadelphia, and then I go to a meeting and I find out that Dell is behind it, and then I find out that Dell is the major contractor of the NSA, and then I start looking because I'm pissed off. And I'm actually really fucking good at this work. I was meant for it. I was meant to do this. So if what you need to do is do out-competing truth movement stuff, the reality is when you came into my messages, Jen, you claimed that this was the missing piece. And maybe rather than appreciating people's different gifts and their different journeys in the moment and what they have to offer to build a broader understanding and expand, what you want to do is drag people down and to call people, say it's their job, and to say that they didn't do the work that they did, and to talk about to make assertions. Now, again, that's all ad hominem. There's nothing factual in any of this stuff that she's saying. And I'm always very clear about my journey. I mean, if anyone wants to just catch me up on some inconsistency, then that's fine. I don't think I'm inconsistent because guess what? I'm actually not lying. I'm living my life as an integrated person who's growing and developing. And I'm very honest about that. And I think if we actually were all honest about the creative potential of us to grow and learn and evolve, that would scare the shit out of the people who are under control. But they want us to cede that to the influencers, right? Okay. So, and I've never said I have all the answers. I always credit people whose learnings help me. And I've always said that I'm still learning. And I've always encouraged other people to do their own work. I mean, in fact, that was the problem with Jeffrey yesterday. Well, the incident with the discourse was that I asked him to actually step up and do work that was related to a post he made about credentialing, blockchain, mind files, and game theory, which was something he was clearly very well prepared to do as someone who is a mathematics professor at Berkeley, former, and someone who initially, his life story that he shares publicly is that he worked for Bechtel in nuclear management construction. Like, this is someone who would know a lot about modeling and simulation and math, but he didn't want to. Jeff wasn't prepared to step up and do that research, which is his right. But I've always actually tried to spread it out and empower other people. Let's see. So almost as if they were handed to you on a silver platter, huh? If there's one thing I'm good at is pattern recognition. And if there's a second thing I'm good at, it's being able to smell a rat from a mile away, probably because I'm the last person who needs to catch up. And I won't even be around for your future dystopia. So I don't really give a flying fuck about the subjects you write about, except as entertainment. And again, this is the coherent, it's not coherent. What she's saying here isn't coherent, but in this moment, she needs to live in her mind that she doesn't actually need any of my information except to laugh at it. But she doesn't realize that Twitter is public and it's documented, right? So again, this is what's going to be really challenging for people is they're going to start to split off because they're going to realize that their past comments actually add up and there's a whole lot of inconsistency there. Since I'm telling you what I really think, you should know that I originally followed and wrote you because I had been told by 3 or 4 people in a 6-month period of time that there was, quote, some new woman who's shown up and, quote, that she's, quote, dirty as hell, someone else's words. So I should, quote, get to work and find out what she's up to. Okay. So again, these are these artificial societies. When I said yesterday that people would need to realize how toxic these are, it's toxic. It's super toxic. So these are people who would like to, in the digital version, like to invite you up to their estate, their little digital corner of the world. Some of these people who've actually, I've found, they've invited, I've pushed away a lot of people. I'm actually not interested in belonging to a lot of stuff. But yeah, you don't want to close your heart to everything, because then they win, right? So someone cozies up to you. So literally when this woman is grooming me and telling me in my private messages that I have the information that's this missing piece and she's really grateful and I'm giving her specific stuff to Italy, that she's doing it and she's acknowledging it, that she was an op. She was sent by people to do that. And I would just say, if you know at GenMax57, maybe you could ask her who she was working with. I think that's fair. Ask Jen when she was looking at the dirty new woman who's shown up with answers handed to her on a platter. Now, I think you know how I present myself, right? So ask, hold these people accountable. But better yet, get out of the fuck out of there, because these synthetic societies are a mind op. Again, in their words, and I did, and I was really quote unquote nice about it too. And sometimes it takes a snake to recognize another snake. And if you're quote just a mom, then I'm Florence fucking Nightingale. Okay. So this woman admits being a snake and coming into my messages. Finally, I find it pretty funny that you felt it necessary to write about little old me, quote, not citing your work. The flattery is just too much. Am I really so important? It might make you feel better to know that for every positive public citation I've made, there have been a minimum of 10 private and negative ones. Not about your work, though, because we all know it's a job you're doing, but about your delusions of grandeur instead. So that's mind control. That's a mind control thing. Because you can't actually get at me. The work stands on its own. The work stands on its own. And I would say for these people who would like to live in toxic waste, which is essentially they've created a digital society of toxic waste. And I'm here just to throw the curtain open on this because, I'm a pretty direct, open operator. But if these people want to live in some toxic waste and they think that that's how they want to spend whatever their last days on the planet, that's their choice. But what I'm saying is they're not necessarily going to come right out on the open and say that they could look like they're your friends. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And I would just say, again, delusions of grandeur. What I'm asking people to be responsible. It's because what I've consistently said is I do believe I have a certain obligation and path that I'm on. It's not because I'm smarter than people. It's because I have the support to do the work, the time to do the work. I have a mind that's meant to do this. Doesn't mean I have a better mind. It's just a different kind of mind to put pieces. And now the next step is for the rest of the people to step up and bring their gifts in, like Eve has done. And I'm going to meet up with Eve in person, which is awesome. And it turns out the place that she's staying at is literally across the street from where I got my early start. When I was just starting out in Philadelphia, my downtown apartment, first downtown city living. So that's really exciting. So yeah, I'm just a person. We're all just people. I think we should respect people and respect people's journeys rather than imagining that you're a sneaky person working with mean people who imagine everyone else is a rat and that you're going to go dig up some dirt on them. In all seriousness, I can't thank you enough for your email. Not only has it provided me with laughs tonight, but I have no doubt I'll be enjoying this for months to come. You're a real hoot. So I think, so this is about opinionist at GenMax57 on Twitter. But it's not just about Jen. It was a useful lesson to me. I'm not just pointing it out because of her, but I think the explanatory coherence, the storytelling, the psyops, the wanting you to never actually understand what you're dealing with or who you're dealing with. That's what's coming with Web3. When I say that they want us to live in the CIA's video game, I'm not kidding. And what I'm asking is for, I'm consistent. I have been very consistent. I have been very firm. I have been very direct about my position about Web3 and digital identity. And I've deepened my understanding. I mean, this whole new section with biophysics is really different too. I've deepened it a lot. These people can't hurt me because I know who I am. I know my story. And it's not a fraudulent story. The story of me is not fraudulent. It's not perfect. It can be messy. It's dynamic. But it's not fraudulent, and I'm comfortable in my own skin. So these people aren't hurting me, but what I think is it's a really good lesson in navigating the spaces and knowing that we don't want to live in this world. We don't actually want to live in a world of Gen Max 57s. Imagine children, imagine the whole bullying atmosphere. Now, you could maybe say that what I did was a bullying thing, but what I was essentially asking her was to be responsible. To, on the one hand, go into an account that was trashing me and pile on, and then in the next month, pull out my material and say it was good. Because that's the stuff that breaks down people's psychology in the mind is the inconsistency and the unknowing. So again, I will close on that. I will say I haven't heard back anything from Jeff beyond just sort of justification and pretending that what he did was okay. Haven't gotten any apology. I did write a blog piece about it, and I actually have the screenshots of the exchange. And you can look for yourself. Never called it a psyop. Actually, there was a different person in the thread who did, but that wasn't how Jeff represented it. And essentially, he wants to sort of imagine that that person was me, but it's not. Like, we're individual people. So yeah, check that out. Understand that part about artificial society too, and the need to belong in these artificial societies, like that their creation, their destruction, wholesale destruction of real society, and pushing us into artificial society where people would totally misrepresent themselves. So I have maybe 15 minutes before I have to go out to Vanguard. So I'm gonna just read a little bit from Feed. It's M.T. Anderson's book, and I started it a few weeks ago. And actually, it's very odd because somebody in the comment said that it was a race baiting book, which is really strange because literally it's about like doofy high school kids, and there's nothing about race, unless they mean that in the beginning that there was a poem about Auden, like, and that W.H. Auden was race baiting. Like, I don't really understand what you were saying. But I did have someone actually come back and say that they appreciated the read. So I'll go back to it. I mean, it's hard because it's actually it's not my vocabulary. It's high school kid vocabulary, and it's very chopped up because it's sort of this postmodern stuff. But it's not the easiest flow. It's not as nice as Louise Erdrich, but I'll do that. So in the beginning of this setup, there's this group of high school kids, and it's this near future, and they have the feed. And again, talk about toxic digital culture. And so they go to the moon, and it's not like as their resort, and it's two young men and two young women, and they're sort of bouncing around, and they're trying to be entertained, but they're not very entertained. And so at this point, one of the guys, he kind of locks eyes on a girl that he's interested in, and it picks up there, and she's a different kind of girl. Juice. I followed her when I could. She was sitting in the snack bar now with her back to the valve. She was all clipped into the seat so she wouldn't float away if she jerked, because there's anti-gravity. I bought a snack. It was chocolate mousse in a tube. I hung on to the counter with one hand. I watched her through my underarm. She was sitting there with her slam suit off now in a bundle. And they're like, this is a place where they're supposed to bounce into each other. Her helmet was on a hook next to her. I took a slug of the tube mousse, and I looked back over at her. She was wearing a dress of gray wool. It wasn't plastic, and the light didn't reflect off of it. Wool, gray wool, and black stockings. Her shoulders were like all bent in, as if she didn't want anyone to be looking at her, and she was just sitting, clipped in. The others came through the valve behind me, and I kept my head low. I didn't want them to be like, hey, unit, hey, Titus, what's doing? And then she'd look at me, and she would be disturbed. Luckily, they came in, and immediately Link and Marty started doing these gymnastics, and they got in trouble. So I could stay watching her without them being a mob on me. And this guy, he was from the club, and he was yelling at them because they kept bouncing in the snack bar, which was off bounds for still bouncing. Behind the girl in gray was a big window, and you could see where we were in a bubble way up high on the moon. Down on the ground, tourists were writing big proteins across the craters, and all the stars were out. And the guys were still yelling at others over by the valve. He was all, da-da-da, be removed from the premises, da-da-da, express instructions, da-da. And I lowered my head, and I turned it towards the girl in gray. And when she thought no one was looking, she opened her mouth. Something trembled there. Juice. She had filled her mouth with juice. Da-da-da, liability. Da-da-da, think you're doing. I shifted. I watched the juice. And for her own amusement, she was letting it go, gentle and sexy. She just opened her mouth and pushed it out with her tongue. The juice came out of her lips as if it was being extracted, real careful, by a rock star dentist who she loved. Her eyes were barely open, and she came out in a low grav, no grav, as a beautiful purple wobble. It hung in front of her juice, and it stayed inches from her face, and her tongue was close behind it, perched in the air like a pink slug gargoyle. And with her eyes almost shut, she watched traces on the drink's round surface swirl. The nose grid. Link whispered at my side, "This so big sucks." "This place doesn't suck," said Marty. "It's good." "Maybe," said Callista, "if there were certain people who didn't go jumping on people's heads near the snack bar, if there weren't those people, then maybe we wouldn't all be standing around here having a big shame banquet." Marty was getting angry that everyone was like turding on his recommendation, and I just wanted them to all shut up somehow. I mean, nicely, because suddenly I realized that we didn't really sound too smart. If someone overheard us, like the girl, they might think we were dumb. I was playing with the magnets on my boots and trying not to look at her. I didn't want her to feel my eyes before I made my move. I was careful. Quendy and Loga went off to the bathroom because hairstyles had changed. And Marty drifted around and made slit eyes at Link. And Link and I were chatting about the girl like I was going, "She's Meg Youch." Yeah, he was going, "What the hell's she wearing?" And I was going, "Wool. It's wool, like from an animal." And then Callista did her own chat to us, which was, "If you want to hear about an animal, what about you two guys staring at their mouths wide open so they look completely Cro-Magnon?" And that shut us up. And we stared out the windows. Rappers were turning through space like birds. And Quendy came back from the bathroom and said, "Oh my God, like big thanks to everyone for not telling me that my lesion is like Meg completely spreading." "Hun," said Callista, "it's not spreading." "Oh my God, it was like going larger than my whole head. I'm going to need a hat just to have all this lesion. I mean, it will like go onto the brim." "Exercise the breath," said Link. "Nobody cares about a stupid lesion." "How can you not? It's huge, and it's right on my forehead. It's like bong." And she trembled her hands around the lesion like it was kind of a lesion gong. Loga went, "No one will notice." "If they don't know you," Marty said, "they're not going to know what you normally look like." "Oh, so they think I usually look like my forehead is like weeping?" "Ask her," said Link, and he pointed to the girl in gray. He said, "Miss, I wonder if you could you look at this girl and tell me if you notice anything?" The girl turned around and looked at Quendy, and she said, "The lesion isn't bad." And Quendy's hands were out in a, "Please, you saw it. See, you see how far is this air? Like, so how far is the airlock?" "Hun," said Callista, "listen to the girl." The girl said, "I've been thinking because of my neck." The girl's lesion was beautiful. It was like a necklace, a red choker. "The face," said the girl, "it's a grid. The two big imaginary lines are one down the center of the face and one across the top of the cheeks. This is my theory anyway. The nose is where those lines intersect. The more a lesion interferes with those lines, the more noticeable it is. See, the hardest lesion to carry off is the one on the nose itself. In your case, you have this lesion, which is entirely on the edge of this one quadrant. And that's not going to matter. It's not on the line." And she unclipped herself and reached up with both hands and touched her thumbs together and made football goalposts around Quendy's face, framing. "See, your lesion, it's on the edge of your face, so it frames your face. It draws attention to your face. The good grid. See, you have this great grid." I'm probably saying way too much. And we were all kind of stunned. "Yeah," said Callista, sounding confused. "She's right. It just frames your face." The girl in gray touched her own lesion with a napkin, and she said, "I want mine to go all the way around. I want it to be like a necklace, but right now it's just a torque." We were all just kind of staring at her like she was an alien, and she smiled, and we kept staring at her. "There are times you just want to sink through the floor," she said, "but then you realize there's no air out there." "Hey," said Marty, "I've got a lesion on my foot. You want to see it?" She smiled sweetly. "No, not really," she said. "What about my lesion? Look at this puppy. It bleeds sometimes. You like this?" She smirked. You put the supper back in supperation." And Link thought this was hilarious. And of course, he didn't have any idea what the hell she was talking about either, but he started laughing while the rest of us were still looking up supperation on the feed, English to English word book. And she was now completely ouch on all of our meters, except with the girls, who I could tell had started to chat each other like some ants after someone's buried a missionary alive in the middle of the hill. On the one hand, I thought she was the most amazing person I had ever seen in my life, even if she was weird as shit. And on the other hand, she was pretty disappointed she was skeezing, like the sexy talk with Link Arwacker, who women for some reason always go for him in spite of the fact that he's a meg asshole to them. For example, a slurpy question about, "Oh, what about my lesion? Let's talk more about me and my open sores." And Marty was still trying to make up lost ground by saying, "Well, maybe you could change the bandages on my foot." But that clearly was just disgusting to everyone. And we were like, "Unit, nobody wants to see your damn foot." And Jesus, Marty, Unit, stow the mess hole. And Link was asking her, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" And then she looked at me, just at me, and I thought I knew she was wondering what I thought about the guys and the seductiveness and the skis and all. And she was waiting for me to say something to see if I was going to skis like Marty and Link. And I wondered whether she wanted me to skis. And she seemed really smart for what she said. And she was pretty. And I was still thinking about that globe of juice floating in front of her face. And I was still thinking about the beauty of how that juice had been born delicately from her lips, and how it had been born whole, and how her tongue stood there afterwards to see the juice make its trembling progress into the world. But I had nothing to say. She and the girls spent the rest of the hour fixing Quendy's hair to like showcase the lesion. And usually when Quendy is just kind of broken, a broken little economy model of Callista. And she knows that, and she feels real bad about it. But when this girl helped her, it wasn't like that. Quendy was the center of everyone for a long time. And that was why I kept looking at the girl in gray and started to want more than anything else that night to be with her. Okay. Okay, so a couple more pages, and then I've got to go to Vanguard. Okay, based on the true story of a clone fighting, so these are like these odd ads, I think. Based on the true story of a clone fighting to save her own liver stuffers, from the cruel and ruthless original who's farming her for organs. Nature versus nurture, a Primus primetime feedcast event. Image of girl weeping on a courtroom floor. I am not girl number 2. Please judge spandex. I am also number 1. I am not a product, but a person. Image of a girl holding a blaster to a twin's temple. More twinning, right? Remember, bitch, you can't spell danger without DNA. Blam! The cola with the refreshing taste of citrus and butter. An adventure in slouching. Calculon, new solutions for. It's dance. It's dance, 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 dance. That's fun. Fun's fun, and fun's what you can have. There's nothing to stop you from fun. Do you see the bodies? Can you smell the beat? Then you can come and roar with us. Come and throw your boots at superstars. Come thrash in the cool until your head opens up and you see the veins of people you love bright as branches against the sky, and burnt in your brain will be the fun, all of the fun, and the lights and the Doppler fade of screaming. You heard the rumble spot, the rumble spot, the rumble spot, an ocean of chaos in the sea of tranquility. Images of coke falling in rivulets down chiseled mountain slides, children being held towards the sun, blades slicing grass, a hand extended toward the lemonade like gods at creation. Boys in Gap tees shot from a rocket, more lining up with tin helmets, Nike grav gear plunging into Montana, a choir of Jamaican girls dressed in pinafores and strap-on solar cells, dry cleaners ironing the cheek prostheses of the rich, friends clutching at birds made of alloys, law partners, jumping fences, snow, altitude, tears, hugs, night. All right. So I'm going to have to go on to my Vanguard trip, but we'll do this chapter next. Thanks for hanging out, everyone.